Reinhold Messner is one of the most famous climbers in the world. He was born in 1944 in South Tyrol, a mountain region in northern Italy. His home was a small village surrounded by high mountains, green valleys, and rivers. The family was large. Reinhold had 8 brothers and 1 sister. They did not have much money, but they had nature all around them. For the children, the mountains were their playground. As a boy, Reinhold spent hours outside. He walked through forests, crossed rivers, and climbed small hills. He often played with his brother Günther, who was close to him in age. They were like best friends. Reinhold said later, "The mountains were our school. We learned freedom there." Reinhold's father was a strict teacher, but he also loved nature. He often took Reinhold and Günther into the mountains. On these walks, they learned many skills. They learned to read the clouds, to feel changes in weather, and to find safe paths on rocks. The father taught them to move carefully, step by step, with respect for the mountain. When Reinhold was 5 years old, he climbed his first small peak. It was not high, but for a little boy, it felt like a great adventure. He felt scared when he looked down, but also proud when he reached the top. This first victory gave him confidence. He discovered that fear can become courage if you continue step by step. Reinhold was not only brave, he was also curious. He wanted to know how the world looked from every hill. He wanted to see the valleys from above and feel the wind on the rocks. Climbing became more than a game, it became a passion. In his teenage years, he started to climb more difficult routes in the Dolomites. The Dolomites are sharp, rocky mountains in Italy, famous for their beauty and danger. Reinhold moved quickly on the rocks, often with little equipment. He learned to trust his hands, his feet, and his mind. Later he said, "The best teacher is the mountain itself. It teaches discipline and patience." By the time he was 20, Reinhold was already one of the best young climbers in Europe. But behind his skill, there was always the memory of his childhood, the smell of forests, the sound of rivers, the sight of the Dolomites in the evening sun. These memories gave him strength for the great adventures that were waiting for him. As a teenager, Reinhold Messner became stronger and more skilled. He spent almost every free day in the Alps with his brother Günther. They were very close and often called themselves 2 halves of one heart. The brothers climbed quickly and with little equipment. Many other climbers used heavy ropes, many tools, and big backpacks. Reinhold and Günther preferred light climbing. They believed this style gave more freedom, but also more danger. In the 1960s, Reinhold became known as one of the best young climbers in Europe. He climbed difficult faces in the Dolomites and in the Alps. Other climbers admired his courage, but sometimes thought he took too many risks. Reinhold answered, "Climbing is not fighting the mountain. It is listening to it, respecting it, and moving with it." In 1970, Reinhold and Günther joined a German expedition to Nanga Parbat in Pakistan. This mountain is one of the highest in the world, more than 8,100 meters tall. It is also one of the most dangerous, sometimes called the Killer Mountain. The brothers were excited, but also nervous. They knew that many climbers had died there. The climb was very hard. The air was thin, the weather was cold, and avalanches were always near. Step by step, Reinhold pushed forward. Finally, he reached the top of Nanga Parbat. It was one of the greatest moments of his life. He stood above the clouds and saw endless peaks around him. But joy quickly turned into tragedy. On the way down, Reinhold and Günther were caught in danger. Snow moved, rocks fell, and they were very tired. An avalanche came down the mountain. Reinhold survived, but his brother Gunther disappeared in the snow. Reinhold searched, called his name, but could not find him. The loss broke his heart. Reinhold returned from the mountain alone, injured and in deep pain. He lost several toes to frostbite. For weeks, he lay in bed, thinking about his brother. He asked himself many questions. Why did this happen? Could I have saved him? The tragedy stayed with him for his whole life. But even in this dark time, Reinhold learned something important. He realized that mountains are beautiful, but also dangerous. They give life meaning, but they also take life away. Later he said, "The mountains do not forgive mistakes. They teach courage, respect, and humility." The death of Gunther changed Reinhold forever. He became more serious, more thoughtful, but also more determined. He decided that if he continued climbing, it would be with greater respect for nature. This tragedy was the most painful chapter of his life, but it also made him into the climber and thinker he later became. After the tragedy on Nanga Parbat, Reinhold Messner continued to climb. He was still young, but already known as one of the bravest mountaineers in Europe. Many people thought he would stop after losing his brother, but Reinhold believed that climbing was not only a sport, it was his way to understand life. In the 1970s, a new dream came into his mind: Mount Everest. Everest is the highest mountain in the world, almost 8,850 meters tall. Many climbers had reached the summit before him, but always with oxygen bottles. The air at the top of Everest is very thin, with only 1/3 of the oxygen found at sea level. Without bottles, people can feel dizzy, confused, and very weak. Some even die. Reinhold asked himself, can a human reach the top of Everest with no extra oxygen? Most experts said it was impossible. Doctors warned that the human body cannot survive at that height without support. But Reinhold believed that the body and mind are stronger than science sometimes says. He wanted to prove it by action, not by theory. In 1978, Reinhold and Austrian climber Peter Habeler traveled to Nepal. Their plan was simple, but very dangerous: climb Everest without oxygen. When they told other climbers, many laughed. Some said they were crazy and would die on the mountain. But Reinhold answered, "It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep." The climb was extremely hard. At high altitude, every step felt like lifting heavy stones. Breathing was painful, and sleep was almost impossible. The cold cut into their bodies, and the wind was strong. But step by step, they continued upward. They had no big group, no heavy equipment, only trust in themselves. Finally, on May 8, 1978, they reached the summit of Mount Everest without oxygen. It was one of the greatest moments in the history of climbing. Reinhold stood at the top of the world. His lungs burned, his legs were weak, but his spirit was full of joy. He looked across the Himalayas, endless white peaks under a deep blue sky. He had proved that the impossible was possible. 2 years later, in 1980, Reinhold returned to Everest. This time, he climbed completely alone, again without oxygen. No partner, no big team, just him and the mountain. It was perhaps his most personal victory. He showed that human courage and discipline can open doors that science once called closed. Later he said, "At high altitude, I am not fighting the mountain. I am fighting myself, my fear, my weakness, my doubts. When I reach the top, it is not the mountain that I conquer, but myself." The Everest climbs made Reinhold Messner a legend. He was no longer only a strong climber. He became a symbol of courage, freedom, and human will. But his journey was not finished. He had even bigger dreams ahead of him. After Everest, Reinhold Messner was already famous, but he did not stop. He wanted to reach all the highest mountains in the world, the so-called 8,000ers. There are 14 of them, each higher than 8,000 meters. They are in the Himalayas and the Karakoram. Climbing all of them was something no one had ever done before. Reinhold believed it was possible, not with big expeditions, not with heavy oxygen bottles, but in a light and simple style. He wanted to move fast, to be close to the mountain, and to accept the risk. He once said, "Climbing with heavy support is like listening to music with noise in the background. To hear the pure melody, you must remove the noise." Through the 1970s and 1980s, Reinhold climbed one peak after another. He stood on top of Kanchenjunga, Makalu, Cho Oyu, and many others. Every climb was different. Sometimes he faced deep snow, sometimes strong winds, sometimes avalanches. But each mountain gave him a new lesson about nature and about himself. In 1986, Reinhold Messner completed the Great Challenge. He became the first person in history to climb all 14 peaks higher than 8,000 meters. It was a record that changed mountaineering forever. Other climbers later followed, but Reinhold was the pioneer. He showed that human limits are further than people once believed. But Reinhold was not only a climber of mountains, he also crossed great deserts. He walked across Antarctica with no motor support. He crossed Greenland on foot. He even crossed the Gobi Desert in Asia. For him, the desert was like another kind of mountain, endless, dangerous, but also beautiful. Why did he do this? Reinhold explained, "I want to know the limits of my body and mind. When I am in a desert or on a mountain, I feel small, but also free. Nature is bigger than us, and that is the truth we must accept." In these expeditions, Reinhold often traveled with small teams or alone. He lived with simple food, little water, and sometimes extreme cold or heat. But he believed that only in such conditions can you discover who you really are. When he returned, people asked, "Why risk your life so often?" Reinhold always answered, "The risk is not only in the mountains. Life itself is a risk. The mountains only make it visible." By the late 1980s, Reinhold Messner was a legend not only for climbing, but for his philosophy of adventure. He became a voice for a style of life that respected nature and human limits. His name was known not only in climbing circles, but also in the general public. Magazines, newspapers, and television spoke about him. He inspired a new generation of climbers and explorers. After many years of climbing and exploring, Reinhold Messner slowly left the world of extreme expeditions. His body grew older, but his mind stayed curious and strong. He wanted to share his experiences with others. He wanted young people to understand the beauty and the danger of nature. Reinhold began to write books. He wrote more than 60 in many languages. In them, he described his climbs, his thoughts, and his philosophy. His words were simple but powerful. He explained not only what happened on the mountains, but also what he learned about fear, courage, and life. He also founded the Messner Mountain Museum. It is not one building, but 6 different museums in South Tyrol and the Dolomites. Each museum shows a different part of mountain culture. One speaks about the history of climbing, another about the life of mountain people, and another about myths and stories from high places. Reinhold wanted visitors to feel respect for the mountains, even if they never climbed them. In public talks, he often spoke about his philosophy. He said, "Mountains are not stadiums where I satisfy my ambition. They are cathedrals, where I practice my religion." For him, Climbing was not about winning against nature. It was about listening, learning, and becoming humble. He believed that nature is always stronger, and humans must accept this truth with respect. Reinhold also became active in politics for some years. He served as a member of the European Parliament. There he spoke about protecting nature and mountain regions. Even in politics, his voice was clear. The earth is our home, and we must care for it. As he grew older, Reinhold often looked back at his life. He remembered the joy of reaching summits, but also the deep pain of losing his brother Günther. He admitted that he still felt sadness, even after many decades. But he also said that the tragedy taught him compassion and humility. Today, Reinhold Messner is not only a climber, he is a storyteller, a teacher, and a philosopher of nature. He showed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue even when you are afraid. He showed that freedom is not comfort, but responsibility for your own choices. When young climbers ask him for advice, he does not speak first about equipment or training. He says, "Listen to the mountain. Respect it. Do not climb to fight it, but to learn from it. The mountain will always be stronger, but if you accept this, it will also make you stronger inside." The life of Reinhold Messner is a story of courage, pain, beauty, and wisdom. From the small valleys of South Tyrol to the highest peaks of the world to deserts of ice and sand, his journey has inspired millions. And even now, when he speaks, his eyes still shine like the peaks at sunrise, because in his heart, the adventure never ends.